Okay, so for my discussion, I chose as Americans, we tend to see our country as the melting pot. Explain the diversity of other countries such as Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, and Canada. While South Africa is one of the most diverse countries, it has more than 100 ethnic groups and 37 tribal groups, and they speak one of 39 languages. So that's the most diverse group. Canada ranks in the top 20, and that's the only Western state or country that does rank in the top 20. America would fall in between Canada and Spain. It's only slightly more diverse than Russia, but slightly less diverse than Spain. The least diverse countries would be Argentina, the Comoros, Haiti, or the Dominican Republic. They're the world's least diverse countries. And most of that has to do with the language that's spoken and the religion that's practiced in those countries. Only one language would be spoken in those countries and predominantly one religion. The second question I chose was provide an overview of the history of the disability rights movement, including where it originated, goals of the movement, and the different organizations involved in addressing disability in the U.S. today. The disability rights movement originated in the 1970s, and the remnants of it have continued into the 90s. The movement was significant in the United States because it was the first time that disabled people were acknowledged as people who deserved to be treated equally as the rest of the society. Before the disability rights movement, disabled people had minimal rights. The movement changed society's way of treating disabled in all aspects of their life, from schoolwork to everyday. The disability rights movement started in the late 1960s, shortly after the civil rights movement. The movement itself was a broad movement that contributed to smaller acts. The public was receptive to the movement at first, but eventually was not receptive to the movement at first, but eventually, over time, they accepted it. The ultimate goal of the disability movement was to include, instead of segregating those with disabilities, as well as provide them the same civil rights as non-disabled Americans. For example, in schools, they practice more of an inclusion of special needs kids instead of having them in segregated classes. Some of the organizations or groups that are involved with the disability rights movement would be, or that came out of the disability rights movement, would be the American Association of People with Disabilities, the ARC of the United States, which is a national organization serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. One that I'm very familiar with, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. It's an international organization that provides support and services and public advocacy for those on the spectrum, while working to improve the public's perception of autism and the related conditions of the spectrum. The Easterseals, an international organization that provides services, education, and outreach and advocacy so that people living with... Sorry, I had to pause the video. So like I said, another group is the Easterseals, and they provide services, education, and outreach and advocacy so that people living with autism and other disabilities can live, work, and play in their community successfully. The third question was, describe how you would feel and what you would do if the government did not recognize your marriage. If my marriage was not recognized by the government, I would feel discriminated against. For me, marriage is just legal binding agreement between two people that protect one another when in a committed relationship, when you share property and other valuables, which is something that should happen with you and your partner regardless of the circumstances. You should be allowed to marry whoever. And if my marriage was discriminated against, I would fight for the rights to have a normal marriage like everybody else in America. So that ends my discussion. Questions for week 6. Thank you.